Hello, sword people. Welcome to the Sword Guy podcast. This is your host, Dr. Guy Windsor, consulting swordsman, teacher, and writer. Join me for interviews with historical martial arts instructors and experts from a wide range of related disciplines as we discuss swords, history, training, and bringing the joy of historical martial arts into our modern lives. I hope you enjoy this greatest hit episode of the show. You can find all the episodes at swordschool.com/podcast, and there's a direct link in the description to this episode's show notes. On with the show.
I'm here today with Dan Edwards, who is a parkour coach and teacher of teachers. He's a founding member and executive director of Parkour Generations, an international organisation of parkour instructors with schools all over the world. And he's also the author of the Parkour and Free Running Handbook. And he has something of a sword background. You can find Dan at danedwards.com, that's DANEDWARDES.com, and at parkourgenerations.com. So, without further ado, Dan, welcome to the show.
Guy, thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm in London at the moment, in Wimbledon, where I live, happily. So, I normally do travel a lot, but pre-pandemic, obviously. But
Yes.
Since the pandemic, I've done no international travel for the longest period of my life, staying in one place. So it's been quite nice.
Yeah, I've pretty much had the same experience. 2 years without leaving the country was just weird.
Yes.
I managed to get to Finland in November, and I dressed it up as a work trip. Like, I had a seminar and everything, but that wasn't why I went. I went just to see my friends. Really,
yes.
I mean, really.
Yes. No, but that's good. That's good. You should. That sort of thing is important. Yeah. If you travel a lot, you do miss it. So.
Yeah, and I'm actually, the worst of it is missing my friends who live in other countries.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's been super tough for so many people on that front, and really unnatural. Yeah, just breaking up the connectivity of the world in that way physically has been really unnatural, I think. So I'm very glad that's all ending now and we can get back to that stuff.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yes, let's say that way, yeah.
Omicron could just fuck off.
Yeah. Well, definitely hope that is the case. Yes, I'm pretty hopeful this time, but like you say, you never know. Actually, there's curveballs can come, it seems.
Yeah. Okay, so you, according to your bio, and we've met before and we've talked about this a little bit, but my listeners weren't listening then, so let's rehash it for their benefit. You came across parkour while you were in Japan, and you went to Japan for the best of all possible reasons. Would you care to elaborate?
I did, yes. I did discover parkour while I was in Japan. Not that anyone else was training in Japan, but I saw it on a cinema in Japan, the original movie Yamakasi, which featured the founding guys. So I saw it while I was living out there, and therefore started training. But the reason I was in Japan in the first place was to study swordsmanship. So I went there to swordsmanship and other martial arts, but I went there primarily to train in the Katori Shinto-ryu, which is a school that you can only train in Japan. In one, there's only one school. So and it's the oldest extant Japanese martial arts. So it's kind of the origin of all their sword arts came from the Shinto-ryu. So I'd known about that since I was a kid and studying the martial arts. So I'd always wanted to train that. So that's why I went to Japan. Yeah, and I lived there for 5 years training that and training in Aikido and shoot fighting and various other things, tameshigiri as well. So I was there for the martial arts. But while there, I encountered parkour and started training in that too. Yeah.
Okay, so just for the listener, tameshigiri is the cutting of prepared mats with sharp swords. We call it test cutting, and we do a lot of it with our swords, but it's more of its own separate thing over there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange thing in a way. In that, so I was lucky in that I was admitted into the Shinto-ryu and started training there, and there were very few Westerners that trained in the school back then. It was really rare. So I was lucky in that I started learning that, and at the same time and separately, I encountered I found a sword teacher called Wakinaga-san, who was this old Japanese guy who taught tameshigiri, and he didn't really have any sort of respect or any interest in the ryuha, in the actual Japanese sword schools. He didn't really give them much the time of day. He was just into how swords work and how do you cut stuff and does it work and the techniques around that. So what actually works. So I guess he was the equivalent of like a combatives instructor in swordsmanship. He was like, I'm only interested in what works, not in any of the faff, any of the tradition, any of the ritual. So I had both sides. It's quite rare for that from a Japanese person, but so I came across both sides, and it was always a bit strange to me that none of the, or very few of the ryuha in Japan, and certainly even fewer of the iaido schools actually train cutting. They actually don't actually cut anything solid for years. Like they can train their whole lives without ever cutting solid. And for me, that's a bit like a boxer never hitting a bag. So it's kind of like you should do that if you're training with a weapon. You should learn what does it actually feel like to hit something with this thing. And you find out a lot when you do that. It's a real. When I was out there, I encountered the Iaido instructors who'd been training 30, 40 years, and Waki-san, who was a bit kind of cheeky and a bit playful in his old age. He would invite them to have a go at cutting stuff, and they would jump at it because they'd never done it. But then they couldn't cut anything.
Really?
Yeah, and it was like
I'm appalled.
Yeah, it was weird. I remember thinking, wait, you guys have been training Iaido for 30, 40 years, some of you, these old guys, and they literally couldn't cut through a tatami. They would hit it and knock it over and stuff. And I was like, I've been doing tamashigiri for like a year at that stage, and was slicing through stuff left, right, and center.
Right.
I
have students who've been training for a couple of months who cut stuff.
Yeah, no,
because you have to know what the blade actually does.
Yeah, you'd think so, but no. There's a lot of schools. The majority of schools and the majority of sword practitioners in the Japanese style, and I don't know about many others, but who never actually cut anything, which I thought was weird. Yeah, so I was lucky to be exposed to both, and I found both, and it made both better. So
sure. Okay, we should maybe say that hitting somebody in the head with a steel bar is going to have an effect whether you cut them or not.
For sure.
So for actual combative stuff, I'm not 100% sure that the cutting is as essential as it might appear, although I'm a huge fan of it. And also the way a tatami behaves sat on its stand waiting for you to cut it is quite different to the way a person behaves with holding a sword. And so my issue with test cutting when it's separated from the actual practical things is you'll do things that work really well for cutting inanimate objects, but will get you killed in a fight. Like, for instance, I've seen tamashigiri competitions where people will step up to the stand, prepare themselves, and then strike. Yes. Do that to a human being who's trying to murder you, and you get a sword through your head as you step forward.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why a combination of the two is good. You've got to learn how to fight with the sword, and you've also got to learn what it feels like when it hits something. Yeah, exactly.
Because at either extreme, you lose something.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And one of the most important reasons, I guess, to learn the art of cutting, and in terms of combative reasoning, I suppose, is that if you cut well with a sword, certainly with the katana or a Japanese blade, it doesn't damage the sword at all. They're actually quite fragile. Yes. So if you cut badly, you can bend the sword. You can damage the sword, and that's going to ruin the rest of your fight. So if you're in a battle or whatever, and you've got loads of people around you, so that sword's got to last, and therefore most of the cutting training, one of the best reasons to train in that is that you preserve the sword. So there's lots of good reasons to do it, but without the fighting art, it's without actually learning the concepts of combat as well, it's useless just as much as learning the concepts, but without learning to hit. So both are good, I think.
Yeah, and then to your point about wearing out the sword, we do quite a lot of stuff sharp on sharp. So beginner students use blunt swords, obviously. And then we use sharp swords for test cutting. Even beginners can do that. But at a more advanced level, we do all the drills and what have you with sharp swords.
Yes.
And the way they behave against each other is different to the way blunt swords behave.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they kind of bite, but also they wear out.
Yes.
Right. I've had swords that started out maybe 2.5 inches wide, and by the time they were retired, they'd lost an inch in width.
Yes.
By being reground.
Yeah, and this is the primary reason in the Ryuhai, the Koryu, the old schools in Japan. The primary reason they use bokuto and wooden weapons is not to protect. A lot of people think, oh, you use weapons to keep people safe. It's nothing to do with that at all. The reason they switched to wooden weapons is to protect the weapons. For exactly that reason, because you don't want to. Swords were expensive; they were rare, good ones, and you didn't want to.
Whereas making more people is free.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you don't want to damage your sword, so use wooden swords. So yeah, I think it's a very good point. Yeah.
Okay, so you went to Japan to study swordsmanship. Was that actually your first martial arts stuff, or did you start martial arts in the UK?
Yeah, and I grew up fanatical about martial arts. So I started studying when I was I started fighting when I was about 8, and then started training in a proper art at about sort of 10. And all through my teenage years was fanatically serious about training and the philosophy of the Asian arts of East Asia as well, and everything that comes with it. So I was heavily immersed in a training childhood with lots of my friends as well, and one of my brothers, and so it was just part of the culture I grew up in a way, or that we created. And then when I finished university, that's when I went to live in Japan, and that's when I sought out the Shinto-ryu. It was the first traditional sword art that I'd studied at great depth. So I trained with lots of different weapons, lots of different other arts, lots of knife systems, stick, staff, all different types of weapons, but never really a traditional sword art. So it was the first time I'd studied that, and it was quite eye-opening for that reason.
And I can just imagine there are probably many people listening at the moment who are just like, oh God, I want to go to Japan and do Katori Shinto-ryu because it sounds just amazingly cool. So, okay, for their sake, when you move, you go to Japan, I assume you need to find a job, you need to have an income, whatever, you need to show up at the dojo and say, please will you train me? And they're probably going to say, no, go away. So you have to come back a few times. And what was that actually like? Yeah,
it's interesting. On the career side, so I went out. I got a job as a lecturer at a university. I spoke Japanese because I studied Japanese at university. So
that's very handy.
It's very handy.
Well, I'm glad you. You mentioned that.
Yeah, that makes
really
a big difference. Yeah.
Okay.
So my degrees were in Japanese and history. So I went to. So I was able to get a job out there at a university. So I was a lecturer. And that in the Japanese universities, not to put them down, they're not as they certainly weren't when I was there. They weren't as rigorous, let's say, as Western universities. So being a lecturer there was quite an easy lifestyle. You had a lot of time to yourself. It wasn't very hard work at all. Good holidays, and so I had plenty of time to train, and that's why I was there. So I spent a lot of time training, and the very early on, obviously I went to the school, to the Shinto-ryu, and managed to, there's always this myth of, you go to, at the old Asian schools, you have to sit outside their door for 3 months and until they let you in. But it's that kind of thing, right? And there's elements of that. There were elements of that. There aren't anymore, I think, in the Shinto-ryu. It's much more open now than when I joined. But I had to there was a period of, yes, you have to show your interest and enthusiasm for a period of time before you're allowed to join. So you have to be committed. You have to keep sort of inquiring, keep showing up, until eventually they say, yeah, okay, you can join. You basically have to show you're serious. But the Shinto-ryu is not it's interesting in that it's within its very kind of the laws of the school, the code that you follow and you sign up to. It still has the blood oath. The Keppan is the only school that still does the blood oath, and in that it specifically says the Shinto-ryu is not a secret. It's not an art that's designed only for a certain class. It was right from its start. It was open to anyone, peasants and samurai and whatever alike. And that was quite rare. It's the oldest school still alive, still going, but it had that in its code. So it was. Its philosophy is, if you are serious, we will teach you. It doesn't matter where you're from or whatever. Which is why Westerners like me could join. So, but yeah, there was an element of that, I had to sort of show that I was there seriously and that I was there to learn, and I was training in other arts, and I spoke Japanese, which really, really helped. There's no doubt about that. Because they were then like, okay, he's interested in Japanese culture. He's taken the time to learn our language. All right. So that made a huge difference. And then I was admitted and started to train. Yeah. So which was pretty cool. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, the old Where the Warrior series on BBC, which was 1980 documentary. Oh my God, go back and watch that. So there was a documentary series called Where the Warrior by BBC Two in 1980. And each episode is on a different martial art, and one episode was on the Shinto-ryu at the school, and it shows Otake Sensei in the school. And
really?
Yeah.
Okay. In my defense, I was 7 years old and we were living in Argentina at the time.
Well, I was 5, so I didn't watch it in 1980, but I watched it at about like 1983 or 4 or something. And I remember watching it and thinking, that is like you look at it and you think that's mythical stuff, this old Japanese school, and wow. And then, you put it to the back of your head and you go off and you train in all the arts I did, karate and kung fu and various combative stuff and Thai boxing and boxing and whatever. So when the opportunity came to like actually be sort of autonomous and sort of I can go anywhere I want and do anything I want, it was sort of, well, why not learn that school? Why not go there and learn that thing that is this mythical school in Japan? So it was kind of there was a moment, I suppose, when I started training and I did the blood oath. I thought, this is crazy in that I'm actually here. I'm actually training with these guys.
I don't know how much you're allowed to tell us about these things, but tell us about the blood oath. What actually is it? What do you do?
So the blood oath is, again, there's not massive secrets around the blood oath itself. There are certain things that Shinto-ryu you can't do and show, I suppose, to non-members of the school. But no, the blood oath is effectively you have a chat with the head teacher, who was Otake Sensei at the time, who died earlier this year, sadly. And he was the head teacher for however long, 60, 70 years or whatever. So you sit down with him, you chat with him. He explains kind of about the school a little bit and asks you a few questions. And then you're presented with he then writes a document that basically admits you to the school on a certain date with your name and all that. And then he gives you a knife, and you have to cut your hand and put your thumb in the blood and put the blood to the certificate. So that's the blood oath. You're signing in your blood. So it's pretty simple, really. And for them, it's very matter of fact because they've been doing it for hundreds of years, and they do it all the time. But yeah, when you're doing it for the first time, you're kind of like, wow, this is pretty rare. You just think this is pretty rare. There's not many places in the world that would expect you to sign in your blood, anymore. But for me, obviously, it was I loved it. I was like, this is excellent. This is good. This is serious.
Okay, you're the only person I know who has actually sworn a blood oath in real life, at least as far as I'm aware. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
The way it's always shown in movies is you take a sharp knife and you hold it in your hand really tight and you pull it through, thus slicing through all the muscles and tendons and everything and ruining your hand forever. Okay, because that's what would happen. What is the actual technique for actually cutting your hand properly? You cut your finger.
Yeah. No, you don't. And it's exactly that. You would never cut your hand because the last thing a swordsman wants to do is disable their hand.
Right, exactly.
You don't do that. You cut the back of your finger with the knife. The knife is very sharp, and you cut your back of your finger with it, and it welds up, and then you take the blood. Because it doesn't matter what you do there. It's not going to affect anything you do because there's just the back of the finger. It's not the tendons or anything. So, you don't cut a hand though. And the knife is super sharp, so you barely feel it really. You feel it after, but you barely feel it while you're doing it because it's so sharp.
Okay. And were you actually instructed in how to do it properly before you had to do it?
A little bit, yeah. It's super quick. Otake Sensei just gives you the knife and he points to that and says, demonstrates the movement. It says, just do that. Right. And then you're like, okay, put it on the table, whack. And basically all I was thinking was, don't chop your finger off. Don't chop your finger off. Because you don't want to, you're in front of Otake Sensei, you don't want to mess it up. You don't want to not cut it because you're like, I'm here to do this. I must do this. But therefore, you've got not adrenaline, but you're quite, you're in the moment. And I remember just thinking, don't cut too hard because I don't want to lose the finger.
And you're not a Yakuza who's just been naughty and is apologizing to his boss.
Exactly. So, and all those thoughts go through your mind of like, oh my God, that's what happens. Don't do that. So it's not that bad. But Yeah, and then it wells up and you bandage it and you start training. That's it.
Cool. Okay. So that's quite a significant sort of initiation ritual into sort of membership of the school. But as far as I'm aware, you're not still training there. So what was it like leaving the school?
So I did continue training when I came back to the UK. There is a small group. When I came back to the UK, there were basically 2 practitioners in the UK. One of which was Mike J, who was one of the first Westerners ever to join the school, and he's kind of quite famous in himself in those circles. He was in a documentary because he was the kind of he married into a samurai family anyway, so it's kind of he's sort of following in the footsteps of William Adams in being an Englishman who sort of became samurai in a way. Not that you can these days, but so I trained with Mike, and he was a teacher in the school. So he lived in Japan for a long time, 30 years, and he was living in London. So I met him, carried on training with him, and one other guy, Alan Gill, who joined after me. And then he came back to the UK. So there was a small group of us, and we trained for many, many years. I haven't trained for the last couple of years, for just because my focus has gone into other training elements, I guess, and obviously the pandemic, everything shut down. But so it's been sort of 2-3 years, I guess, since I've trained the Shinto-ryu. But yeah, I trained it from 99 in Japan through to about 2017 in the UK, something like that. Like every
Okay, so while you were doing all the parkour stuff, which we are definitely going to be going into in some detail, but so you actually kept up your Katori Shinto-ryu training?
Oh yeah, and I still do now. I just don't train with the group so much. So I still train the Iaijutsu and some of those solo skills. I just don't have at the moment, I can't access like where they're like this small group that still trains. I can't really access them at the moment regularly. So, and because of my travel before the pandemic, I was traveling so much, it kind of got very tough to maintain it. But yeah, I still do now. I still train the Iaijutsu and that stuff. So you kind of keep that going. Yeah.
Split. And in Katori Shinto-ryu, do they have, sort of like sparring and that sort of thing?
So it's based on the main chunk of the practice is based on what are called kata, which are basically two people. You know, as you know, I'm sure 2 people going at each other in these kata. These very complex, very fast, very dynamic kata between sword and spear, sword and naginata, sword and bow, sword and 2 swords, and they're very dynamic, they're very fast, but they are kata. They are patterns that you use. So there's no pure sparring in it, which is again interesting as well. Yeah, when you look at like which schools spar and which don't. But there are in-depth reasons as to why they moved away from that hundreds of years ago and moved into like, actually, these is probably going to be a better way for us to train the swordsman. Okay. So it's quite interesting, yeah. But and I love the sparring. And when I was growing up, obviously I did tons of that. In obviously in all the unarmed arts, I do a lot of that. And then I did a lot of sword sparring as well myself before I started. As I say, it was the first traditional sword art I learned. But I with my group of friends, we engaged with a lot of sort of sword play ourselves and against other swordsmen like kendoka and that sort of stuff. We would seek them out and fight them. And so I kind of knew what it was like to fight with a weapon as well. But in the Shinto-ryu, there's no pure sparring, though.
Okay. And you said there were reasons for that. What are they?
Yeah, so the reasoning in the school is that, which you can go into great depth with the taika sensei or with whoever's the head teacher or whatever. But the reasoning in the school mainly is that the reflexes that they are trying to build into people for sword fighting, because sword fighting is so dangerous, and so so one of the things that I noted very quickly about that sort of fighting and all sort of armed fighting rather than unarmed is in unarmed fighting you can afford to make mistakes and make errors and get hit and whatever, but with as soon as weapons are involved you can't really afford to make a mistake. So you have to be very, very precise and it has to work first time. So the reflexes they're trying to build into you are from all the movements they engage in, this is why you do it at such speed, and they're very alive kata. They're not just, you're never allowed to go through them just plodding through them like you are when you're doing kata by yourself in martial arts. It's very much responsive. So you know what the opponent's going to do, You don't know exactly when they're going to do it or how fast or anything like that. And when they do it,
Right.
your response has to be immediate. And there are hundreds of movements in each kata. So it's very complex. And what it's trying to do is take out your conscious thinking and replace it with a kind of limbic brain response to that attack coming in, so that your body will react and do that in the time, and will do exactly the right thing. Because you can remember the kata they designed mostly are designed against armor. So you're designed if you're fighting against someone in armor. So all the cuts are designed to find the weak points in their armor. So it's not, it wouldn't be good enough just to smack them on the head because you've got a helmet. So you've got to find the weak points. So every cut has to be super precise, and it has to be so quick that you can consciously sort of think about it. So in a way, they're trying to train. In a way, it's interesting because it means the old arts had the understanding that the startle reflex and subconscious movement, limbic brain movement, is quicker than prefrontal cortex movement, controlled movement, which is we understand through parkour and all that as well. So, and quicker and better and more effective. So if you can train that, if you can access that, if you can train the element of your brain that can access that in combat, you will be more efficient, rather than trying to work out in the moment what the best thing is to do to respond or to act or whatever. So that's kind of one of the explanations behind it, is to train those instant and perfect reflex to something coming in at you, which is quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I approach things. My school, my way of training, has a lot more of the kind of set pair drills than many of my colleagues do.
Right. Yep.
I include sort of sparring or free play, whatever, however you want to call it, as a kind of whenever you're doing a drill, it's not always exactly correct. As you said, you might adjust the timing. You might adjust the measure a little bit, right? You might mess around with it a little bit to make sure the person is responding to what they're actually seeing rather than what they think is coming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And when you make enough of those changes, you are effectively free playing.
Yes. Absolutely.
Right? So to my mind, it's a really great place to go to generate mistakes, right? Which you can then use the less free training patterns to correct those mistakes.
Yes.
So you might notice in free play that you are vulnerable to a cut up under your arms because you just don't see it that often.
Yeah.
Right. So that tells you, okay, right now the exercises we do around cuts under the arms, that's what I need to focus on for the next month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the next however long.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a combination of the two is best. Same as unarmed stuff. I think, if you don't have live, that old phrase, like the all training is fake, but the idea is to find the least fake shit out there. Right. So, because training is not fighting. So,
right.
But the closer you can make it to fighting, the more your body will be ready for it when it actually happens. So sparring is a really good, or free play is a really good thing to do. And if you inform it with drills that are trying to teach you the right techniques and trying to drill them in as immediate reactions, then if you combine the two, you probably produce like maybe the optimal outcome. So it's interesting that they don't, but yeah, in a way, the Shinto-ryu forms are in a way they're so alive that they are kind of like sparring, because you choose the timing, you choose the distance. Sometimes I saw people get knocked out in the school during kata quite regularly, right? Because
Okay.
if you weren't quick enough and you got hit, or you did the wrong response or whatever, you would get hit. Or if you went too fast, if you're training with one of the more experienced students, and you start to, it's very easy to see when someone is just going through the motions, right? So they're predicting attacks, and they're not trying to hit the opponent. They're trying slightly to the left or to the right.
Oh God, yes.
All that kind of crap. And if the senior students saw that during training, they would make an example of it. They would either preempt your attack to show that they knew exactly what you were going to do, or they would just stand there and let you miss and then hit you.
Yes.
So
I've done that many times.
yeah, and it's a good learning tool, right? So
yeah. And it's normal, if you've got a drill that goes on for several steps, and if you're thinking about, I don't know, step 4, then your step 1 and 2 are going to be a bit crap.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, exactly.
So you've got to be thinking about the one that you'll be focused, thinking is the wrong word. You've got to be focused on the one that you're doing when you're doing it. and let the ones that happen next happen next.
Yes, exactly. So aliveness drill.
Yeah.
You've got to stay in the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very complex thing to learn and to train the Shinto-ryu. It takes a long time to learn the basic syllabus of all the weapons and the use of the weapons but it's the good thing about it is what I really love about it is that it is as stripped down as possible. There is, compared to all the other koryu that I experienced out there, most of the other koryu, which a lot have been recreated over time, or they died out and then they were brought back hundreds of years later. So kind of reinvented in a way. A lot of them were full of, ritual and paraphernalia and huge sort of ritualistic, respectful forms before you actually train. And the Shinto-ryu has none of that. It is completely stripped down. They do a little bow, as they enter the dojo. That's it. And then you give a little bow to your partner and then you train. And it's just non-stop training. So for the whole 2 hours, 3 hours that you're in a class or whatever, or training in the dojo, it's non-stop. So you don't get any rest and there's no faff around it. There's no kind of extra sort of ritualistic flowery stuff that's been added on. Because they're really trying to keep it as original as it was, which was an art to train soldiers. That's what these schools were. They were arts to train soldiers to kill in battle. So they didn't have much paraphernalia and ritual and all that stuff. So it's a very simplistic, practical school, and I love that. That aligns with my approach to fighting and to martial arts as well. Is like the more practical elements. So it's quite interesting in that. And it's very old. It's the oldest one, but it's the one that has the most respect in Japan. It's an intangible national cultural treasure and all this. And Otake Sensei, the head teacher of the school, the head teacher of the Shinto-ryu, is the guy who, if you try to take a sword out of Japan, an old sword, a shinken, out of Japan through the airports, he is the guy, because he lives near Narita. The school is about an hour from Narita Airport. That school, the head teacher of the guy is the guy they asked to come to the airport to check the sword to see if it's allowed to leave the country. So it's super important, the school in Japan. And yet they're completely, they have no interest in kind of ritual and all that sort of stuff. It's just like, no, we just train. We just need to train and learn how to use the weapons really well and learn how to kill with the weapons, and that's it.
I think Dave Lowry wrote something about this, like the more rituals there are around the drills, the newer the school. Yeah,
that's probably an inverse proportionate relationship. Yeah.
I think it was in his book Brush and the Pen. You must be familiar with his.
Yeah. I've read it, but I can't remember it that well. A long time ago.
Autumn Lightning, Persimmon Wind.
Yes.
Do you know, I really want to get him on the show. I think he'd be a really good
the books are good. I mean, it's a long time since I read them, but they were good.
Because he sort of did the same sort of thing, but he started out in the States because there happened to be a pretty high-level teacher in his hometown. And he did the thing where, you knock on the door, no, sorry, no, not today. And then you come back the next day, no, sorry, not today. And you keep doing that for a few weeks. And then, okay, fine, and you come and, there's... I like all of that stuff, but I don't do any of it.
No, I mean, it's not necessary these days, I suppose. But in some ways I still see the why you would do it as a teacher and with a school. I can still see why you would check, because then you've got serious students. You're not going to get people turn up and just drift in and out for a few months or whatever. It's very clearly not a club. The school is a school.
Right.
It's not like they don't want you to just join and turn up and bugger off after a couple of months. You've had a bit. No, they're very serious about this. Is a school. If you join, this is an art you will train for many years, if not your whole life. And therefore they're quite serious about that. And the main thing that keeps that serious is that in order to do the Keppan and join the school, you have to go to Japan and you have to go to Chibaken and this little village near Narita, and you have to spend time there, and then you have to do the blood oath, and that's the only way. Certainly when I joined, that was the only way you would be taught the art. There's no other way you can learn it unless you've done that blood oath. You're not allowed to be taught it. None of the other part of the oath is you're not allowed to teach someone that isn't a member of the school. So, so that keeps it very serious in a way. You can't just sign up
But
unless you're willing to travel there.
Yeah, I mean, we have completely different. So I guess needs is probably the right word. Like, so for historical martial arts these days, our traditions died, or they changed into completely other forms.
Yeah.
Like, a T-Rex is related to a chicken, but they don't really look the same.
Yes.
And so we are less concerned with making sure only the serious people get it, and more concerned with making sure lots and lots of people hear about it, so the people who might become serious will become attracted to it.
Yes.
So we have quite different. Also, we don't have like the government of any country telling us we are intangible national treasures and to be revered and respected and all that lot. No, it's like, oh, bunch of nutters with swords.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's a bit different over here. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right, and it depends on the goal of what's the goal of the art, what's the goal of the people behind it, and obviously, as you say, most martial arts, when they came to the West from the East, because obviously a lot of the Western ones died out, but most of the Eastern ones that came over here and were adopted over here, they pretty quickly became, big business, and therefore they were spread for other reasons, and they also were as you say, the chicken and the Tyrannosaurus thing, they were no longer. They were no longer fighting arts. They were no longer designed to train soldiers and killers. They were trained for social reasons, for personal development reasons, for health reasons,
right.
Which is great. And those arts you do want to expand to thousands and millions of people because you want all those people to get the benefits. But yeah, an art that is designed kind of primarily for killing is something that's like, you don't want millions of people to learn that way.
No, you really don't.
So yeah, it comes down to why do you want to learn, and what's the purpose of the school? What's the goal of the school? I guess. Yeah.
But one thing I have come across many times in historical martial arts in sort of my circles is people who think the whole killing thing is cool and aspirational. And so they want the thing that they're doing to be all about that, but they don't want to sit down and have like the ethical discussion of, well, okay, under what circumstances is it actually all right to slam a sword through somebody's face?
Yes.
Right? Because it's really not cool at all. It's brutal and nasty and smelly and, right. I mean, I've attended an autopsy. It's not pleasant.
And the negative effects on you being the one that does it are also incalculable.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, you see those sorts of problems in soldiers coming back from Afghanistan now as they did from Vietnam and Korea and Second World War and all that. It takes a toll.
Yes.
And one which I personally have no interest in paying.
Yeah.
If I get to the end of my sword career without ever having killed anyone, I've won.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. And there are so you don't need to learn those elements anymore. However, as I'm sure you know when you train, there's a different I suppose outcome when you're training with the mindset of this is a killing art kind of thing, and you really go into that, as you say, you really go, what does that mean to me? And you remember where it came from and what it was for, and that it kind of changes your relationship with the techniques and with the movements and with the school itself. And I suppose there's an air of more seriousness around it. So like this was for that, and I don't want to use it for that, but that's what this was for. And humanity learned this and trained this, and it was common. And and violence is still a common thing in the world. But so it helps you have a relationship with violence, I suppose, if you go deep into it, which is probably. And most of the old samurai, ways of training and the books and things like that, and the philosophies, a lot of them early on were very much about that. Like you must have a relationship with death, you must accept death and understand death, and therefore violence and killing and being killed. And in doing so, I think it doesn't necessarily make you a violent person or a killer. It can actually make you profoundly pacifistic, as it probably has with you, and that you end up coming away with the reaction you had, which is, I never want to do that. Because you now understand how bad it is.
Right, exactly.
So I think it can be a good thing.
It's not glamorous or sexy or cool. It's just fucking nasty.
Yeah.
But it's that nastiness that adds the kind of moral depth to what we're doing.
Yes.
Because if there's no if it's just a sport where you tap your friends with swords and whoever gets the most taps hit wins, and da da da, it's fine. Nothing wrong with that, and that's a useful aspect of training.
Yep.
But if you take the killing side of it out entirely, then there is no moral depth to the art at all. It's entirely sort of it's a superficial thing to do. You don't actually have to sit and think about what are you willing to do and where are your boundaries and what is reasonable, and you don't have to engage with any of that, which I think many people don't want to, and that's fine. Right? There's nothing wrong with doing sports.
No, 100% not.
I'm personally not into sports myself, but other people are, and that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
And you can get a lot of the benefits from just the sport, but I'm actually really interested in the moral aspect of what we're doing.
Yes, yeah, me too. Yeah, and I think that you learn, as you say, the majority of people are not really. The majority of people they're not interested in that. They're doing it for health reasons, sport reasons, and all that, which is really great, and it should be that way. But yes, there are certain people for whom it's a different tool, it's a different vehicle. It's a training in those arts and fighting arts in that way is a vehicle by which to understand themselves and their own relationship with their own violence and their own anger and their own fear and their own the nastier sides of ourselves, maybe the darker sides that we don't engage with very much. This sort of training allows you to engage with that in a way, but in a managed way, and in a way that is rooted in a tradition from people that did experience that, and so they can pass this stuff on. So in some ways it's a really effective vehicle, but to learn about yourself, for self-knowledge. If you're that kind of person that is seeking that kind of self-knowledge, it's not going to appeal to everyone.
Yeah. The fear thing is interesting, because when somebody is swinging a sharp sword at your unprotected face, even if you know that they have no intention to actually murder you, it's quite scary. And you know that if you screw things up, they're going to have a very bad day because they'll feel really guilty, and you'll have a very bad day because it's probably your last day. So, and I know you've said somewhere, I forget where, I think maybe it's in one of your blog posts, the thing you want is on the other side of fear. And I remember when I was at your parkour school doing a day seminar thing.
Yeah.
The absolute best moment of the whole day for me was when this exercise we were doing, jumping from a little pad onto a low wall, and you could take the distance you want or whatever. I went up to do it, and my body literally froze, and I kind of hung in the air off my joints, because something in the back of my head had just said no.
Yes.
And it was like, brilliant. Okay, so then I went back around to do it again. I knew that was coming and I could get over it, and I actually made the jump, and that was the thing. Yeah. That was the best bit, right? Yeah. So tell us about how jumping off buildings and stuff is good for you, really.
How's it good for you, really?
and how honestly, how the thing you want is on the other side of fear.
I mean, yeah, I think you're exactly right, and you've explained it pretty well there. And that's exactly why I fell in love with parkour from day one as well, is because the first jump I did was the same. It made me afraid, and I hadn't been afraid in a long time. Not viscerally like that. I got so used to fighting and martial arts and, rolling around with people and beating them up or whatever and getting beaten up. So that didn't frighten me anymore. So when I first came to a jump in parkour, I remember the same thing as you. I was like, wow, this is really, really scary. I don't know if I've got I knew I could do it technically and physically, as you knew you could do it technically and physically. But I was sort of like, I know I could do this. I should be able to do this. But I'm scared of doing it. And that fear was, I engaged with that and went through the process to jump. And after that, I was like, okay, this is my art now, because this is missing from my life. So parkour is, I mean, it is in a way an embodied practice of fear, I suppose, parkour, in that when you, it probably shouldn't be, because it's just natural movement. So if humanity was still moving around, well and healthily and naturally like we did in pre-industrial times, probably wouldn't be. But for the fact is, most people in the modern world now don't engage with anything that kind of scares them on a physical level very much, not in a real visceral sense. So most people, especially adults, when they come to parkour, kids is a bit different, but when adults come to parkour, most of them feel fear, exactly like you did, like straight away. And therefore it's kind of an embodiment of fear, this discipline, in that this is what you're going to engage with. And yes, you're going to learn techniques, you're going to get stronger, you're going to get mobile, you're going to get flexible. We're going to teach you all that, we're going to help you with that. that's almost automatic. You know, your body is an amazing system of systems. It's going to respond to these stimuli really well, these stresses, and it's going to become awesome athletically. Don't worry about that. But the thing you are really going to have to deal with is the psychology and your own mind and your own fear. That's what will inhibit you. That's what will hold you back, and therefore that's what will decide how far you go with it. It's not going to be the physical element that is going to get better. So, but the psychology, that is much trickier to deal with. So it's in a way, you know, I've always viewed parkour as the combatives of the movement world. See what I mean? There's, as you say, there's the Tyrannosaur and the chicken. There's martial arts, and then there's the combative arts, right? Which is like what actually works in a fight. And that's a very small subset of the martial arts. And parkour, in a way, is in the movement world and in the physical movement world, and the training world, the sports world, the fitness world, let's say, all those things. Parkour is the combative equivalent, is the equivalent of combatives. It's this is what, can you actually move? Can you actually do these things? Can you actually climb this building? Can you actually do this jump? Can you actually, you know, not can you do it theoretically, not can you simulate it in a soft environment, not can you do it with pads on, but can you actually do it with all the risk and all the reality of concrete and whatever? Can you actually do it with your body? And that is a very real stress test of what you can do physically and mentally. And that's why I loved parkour. That's why I was like, this is amazing. Because I'd never been tested in that way, or I got used to being tested in that way in one environment.
And when you get comfortable with the domain, that challenge goes away.
Yeah, to a degree, yeah, it does.
It's like getting over stage fright. You know, if you happen to have stage fright and you do sort of like exposure therapy, so you go up on stage many times and you kind of get control of it, whatever, then it stops being that frightening.
Yes.
Because that's just social fear.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
Whereas I think, you know, knowing if you fail to make this jump, you're going to die. I don't think that fear goes away.
No, the visceral fear always kind of remains. Yeah, you just learn to manage it. You just become very good friends with it, and you realize, as you did, like, okay, I know it's coming now, so I just need to have a good relationship with it and work with it. And that never goes away. That constant, that's always there, no matter how long you train. So that's really good in a way. And also, the other reason that parkour really attracted me a lot was that, you know, in the martial arts and the fighting arts, as I say, you know, you're always looking for the least fake shit out there. The best will in the world, unless you're actually going to like get involved in bare knuckle boxing or, you know, or really ruthless fighting, unless you're happy to go and actually fight people, you are, most of the time, it's very hard to actually find out, you know, what you've got in that way. Does it work?
Yeah.
Can I do this? Can I fight? Whereas, so you can't really test it. You can, but only in managed ways. Whereas in parkour,
like
it's the opposite.
Tournaments.
Yeah, there's sports and
tournaments try to fill that gap, but to my mind, they really don't.
Yes,
because does it work in tournament? It's not the same thing.
100%. It's still a sport, still a managed environment. You still know you're not really going to get hurt. You still got pads on, whatever. Whereas parkour is not. It's not that way. So parkour, it is like, okay, this is it, and it's not like we don't seek danger or anything like that in that way. But and I don't think it is dangerous. But you are. It's very real when you look down at the ground, even if you're only 3 foot off the ground. You know, when you look down at a jump and you think, if I miss this, it could hurt. I could end up on my butt and bruise myself, and you don't really want to do that. So that's a very real thing. And then of course, if you go to higher jumps or more complicated things, then it becomes, then the risk can increase, but your skill obviously increases commensurately. So, but yeah, it is a real test of your body and mind every single day, parkour. And for me, that reality was lacking, and that revealed things about about myself to me that I wasn't discovering through even through martial art. So I
right.
That's why I fell in love with it.
Okay, now according to the blurb of your book, Ultimate Parkour, and I copied this off Tinternet, and even that was wrong. Okay, combining the core elements of running, jumping, and climbing with the discipline of the martial artist, free running, or parkour is more than simply an elegant, non-competitive sport. It is an art form, a philosophy promoting fitness, imagination, community, spirit, and ethical, healthy living. Now, okay, parkour is obviously dangerous. The risks are apparent to it. Well, no, okay. It is always going to be dangerous jumping off a building where, okay, let me finish my thought. Okay. Flying planes is dangerous, right? It is obviously dangerous, and therefore it is made extremely safe. Right? I'm currently learning to fly planes, and so I am getting an in-depth look at all of the safety stuff that goes around this obviously dangerous activity.
Yes. Okay.
Commercial aviation is incredibly safe because it's obviously dangerous.
Yes. Okay.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because the danger is obvious, we take all sorts of reasonable precautions against it, and therefore it becomes quite safe.
Right. Yes.
Right? Whereas driving a car feels safe, and so people get killed all the time.
Yes.
Because they feel like they're sitting in their living room, and they've even got cup holders with a cup of coffee or something, and they're listening to this podcast perhaps. If you're driving right now, pay attention to the fucking road and not to two sword geeks geeking out. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And so bad things happen because it feels safe.
Yes.
Right? So when I say parkour is obviously dangerous, there are things you do where anybody can look at that and go, if you get that wrong, something very bad is going to happen to you. Right?
Yes.
So the dangers are obvious. So how do you make it safe enough to be reasonable to practice? And I speak as a parent who cannot afford to have my children grow up fatherless.
Yeah. So and the reason I would take issue with the word danger is just that it's just semantics, really. But it's the difference between risk and danger. So parkour, the consequences of failure in parkour, just as the consequences of failure in flying, are more obvious to people. You're right. But what decides whether something is dangerous or not is not the severity of the consequences. It's the severity of the consequences multiplied by the likelihood of the occurrence. That is how you come to the risk rating of something. Yeah. So parkour, I would say, is obviously a risky pursuit, and some of the consequences of those failures are more obvious to people. But yeah, it's no more. There's no more danger in it than playing a game of rugby. It's just the training required. It may, as you say, maybe less obvious. So, but this is just semantics, really. So, how do you make parkour safe? Well, parkour is the first thing to realize is that parkour. What is the point of parkour? What are we trying to do? In the origin of parkour and the discipline of parkour is not about seeking high risk activity. So the point of parkour is to make yourself as physically and as psychologically capable and effective in your environment as you can. So that's the point. So you can train that without ever going high if you want. You never have to risk your life at height in parkour if you don't want to. The only reason height training was included was because it was seen that to be as completely effective as possible in my environment, I must also be able to deal with the incapacitating fear that can come about through going high for some humans. Right. Not every human has a fear of heights. But so that was an element of, to be completely practical, I must also be capable at height. So it's not about thrill seeking in that way. It's about, that's just part of my training if you want it. And a lot of people in parkour now, they're not interested in having that little element of it, of the being practically competent at height. So that all their training is at ground level, which is totally fine, because parkour is just a movement skill. It's just about, and it's basic in its movement, in physical terms. It's just about learning how to move your body and how to master your body in any environment. So can I climb over here? Can I jump this? Can I run this? And it was as much about physical characteristic development as it was about technical skill. Technical skill actually came later in parkour's development. Initially, it was about strength, endurance, agility, confidence. These things were far more important in the origin, and then later the technical skills developed. So it's actually just a way of, a very old way of training the body to do what it is evolved to do, which is to move over terrain. That's what the body is. That's the function of the human body. So all we're doing is training the evolutionary function of the human body and making it better. So if you train that gradually and you progressively work with where someone is at and you develop them, it can be, as safe as any athletic practice. I wouldn't say totally safe, because it's as safe or more safe than a lot of, for example, statistically, you are more likely to get injured playing rugby or football than parkour. So
but running itself has like a 70% annual injury rate.
Yeah.
Now, there's 70% of people who run seriously get injured every year, which is incredibly high.
Yeah. I think it's actually high.
And horse riding is fatal.
Yes,
it's more dangerous than motorbikes.
Yeah, many injuries, many deaths. Yes,
but actually, what this reminds me of, I go indoor climbing quite regularly because it's local, it's available. A couple of friends of mine do it, so we go quite regularly, and it's great fun. And one of the things I get out of it is I am actually scared of heights, and so climbing up a wall, I can actually get into practically panic attack territory. Mm-hmm. Right? When I'm only maybe 2 meters above a padded surface.
Yeah.
Right? Which is great.
Yep.
Because I can get to that, but I can get to that edge of terror and then have to kind of breathe through it and figure out and complete the route or not complete the route or make a sensible choice and then get down safely. Right? And it's really handy being scared of heights because you can generate that
very
fear response quite easily. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes it easy to generate, so it's easy to train against. So when fear happens in other contexts, you have the experience of, okay, this feels like panic. Get rid of it. Get it under control. That kind of thing.
Yes.
And so having the pads doesn't actually make any difference in the back of your head.
I know.
Because no, the height is real. The pads, who knows?
Yes, yeah, and you can still get hurt doing that. You can still roll, badly roll an ankle.
And actually, and that's where I was going next. Because a little while ago, a woman came off the wall badly and got a complex fracture of her ankle. Right, which shouldn't have happened from where she was. It was just one of those freak things.
Yeah,
and there was medics coming in and ambulance and all that sort of thing. And me and my friends who were climbing, we got, for the rest of that day, we were super cautious. It was we were just no, let's not try that route over there because we might fall off and they'll need another ambulance.
Yeah. No, that's normal. But it's, as you say, it's very unusual. But it can happen, yeah.
Okay, so you fell in love with parkour, but there wasn't much parkour happening in Japan at the time.
There was no parkour in Japan.
Okay, so how did you get started?
No parkour anywhere, really.
Right, so because this is 2001, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you actually start parkour?
So, like I said, I saw saw stuff when I was in Japan, saw the movie, and then I saw pretty soon after, I think 2001, I think the BBC did an ident, a little ad, BBC ad or whatever they called them, idents, with David, another one of the founding guys of a guy running across a load of roofs in London. And I kind of put the two together and were like, this kind of the same, this is kind of the same thing. And looked into it and did some research and found out who those guys were, the founders in France, the Yamakasi, been training, who created it. And there were a handful of guys in the UK, 3-4 guys in the UK who were practicing at the time, and I was living in Japan. So I managed to get in contact there was a French-speaking forum called parkour.net, which was the only way that people could communicate in parkour sort of online back then. This is obviously before YouTube and all that sort of stuff. So got onto the forum, met some people there. It was mainly in French, but my French is okay. So I met some people there and then connected with the UK crowd through that. And so when I came back from Japan in the summer, I would come back to England in the summer because I was a university lecturer and summers in Japan are very hot. So I would come back here. And when I came back to London in the summer, I was able to find the UK guys, start training with them. And it's through them that I managed to access the French guys in France, went over to France and started training with them. So, and then I would go back to Japan, train in Japan with two friends out there who were also into it at the same time as me. So we started training in Japan. We'd come back training, and then I'd come back and train in the UK in the summer holidays. Did that for the first sort of 2 years, I guess, and then 2004, maybe the end of 2004, I came back to the UK permanently, and so was able to train much more regularly with the French guys and all that back here. So it was a pretty haphazard intro, and you got to remember back then there was no teaching. There was no classes, nothing like that existed. It was not an organized thing. There were maybe 50 people in the entire world that did it or knew about it. So
how did you train?
It's a good question. So most training back in the day in parkour, unless you could access the founders in person and train with them, which I was lucky enough to do very early on. But most of the training was a really organic kind of, people would upload videos and you would have to sort of try and download them and watch them, and it would take ages because So it was crap back then. But you'd watch these grainy videos of guys in France training, doing stuff, and then you'd basically mimic it. You'd go out and model those movements and try and copy what they were doing and try and replicate them in your environment, and just apply the concept. But it was very rough. There was no information, no teaching, nothing written down, no websites, no classes. So it was very, very organic and rough.
So in what sense are these people the founders? What did they actually found?
So they were the ones.
They don't have like a teaching method or a body of technique or anything like that. What did they actually create?
So they started training in the early 90s as a group of young friends, sort of, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, with other people around them, family and friends, these two families, the Hanotra family, the Bell family, and other people around. And they started training and they started, they were just using their environment. They were exploring their environment because they were young kids that were playing. They had influences from athletics, from gymnastics, from martial arts, from the method naturelle, from which is an old French method of movement. They had influences like that from their parents and their families and tribal cultures. Some of the Hanotra family from New Caledonia, this sort of ethics from there, and it's basically created a melting pot in the suburbs of Paris, whereby these kids who were sort of the banlieue, the suburbs where they were sort of they're kind of seen as lower class, and rest of Paris doesn't have anything to do with them. They use their environment to explore their bodies and minds, and it kind of just went from play to an actual discipline of practice, and actually this idea of what can we do, how strong can we be, how effective and competent can we be, can we do this, like a rites of passage type thing, sort of testing themselves every day. And from that arose technique, and from that arose concepts and principles, and they were never written down, no, but they were understood by them. So other people would therefore one by one would slowly come over and start wanting to learn. Not many stayed with them, and it was a very small thing by the time I'd founded it, it was, as I say, maybe 50, 100 people in the world who knew about it. A couple of people in different countries, but most people in France, and it was very organic. It was just very much the only way you could learn was to go out, find one of those people, train with them, try and keep up with them. They wouldn't teach you. They wouldn't really teach you. They would just say, "Well, just try and do what I do." So it was it was pretty rough and ready. So we were the ones that created the teaching around it. I was a university lecturer. I taught in martial arts. Forrest, one of the other founders with me, one of the French guys, he had a background. He was a military PT instructor, and a high-level athlete. So we were the ones that created the teaching structure around it. We ran the first sort of classes, I guess, so those happened in the UK. The first publicly accessible classes where you could actually just go and learn from a guy who would actually teach you.
Right.
So the teaching came from that. But when I learned, there was none of that. So my learning in Japan, especially when I was in Japan, when I was in the UK, I was surrounded by other people that were doing it and would be doing it about as long as I had, or slightly longer. And I had access to the French guys, so I could learn a lot very quickly. But when I was back in Japan, we didn't really know what we were doing. So we would just go out and do our best. But and now I look back, I don't train like that now. But at the time, it was very simplistic training. It was literally find a location, pick a line of movement through this location, and sometimes they'd be up to 1 kilometer long, and go. Just run and try and overcome every obstacle in your path on that way, whether it involved climbing, dropping, swinging, whatever, bolting. Just go. Try and do the circuit, come back, and then do it again, make it better. So it was a super basic but very effective way to get fit and strong and agile.
But that's not how you train now. So how do you train now?
No, now I guess we're much more sophisticated in it, and I'm much more scientific about it, and but a lot of those older principles we keep within it. So we still try, and the basic training is in a way is still similar, that we take people, we expose them to an environment. We first of all ask them to deal with that environment, to overcome it. Like, here's your task. It's very much what we call task-oriented training, which is rather than sort of just training arbitrary random movements. It's a case of the task is get from here to here, get from here to up there. Get across this or whatever, carry this over there, and then we see how they solve that. So first we let people engage with the obstacles themselves, with no middleman, just them and the obstacle, how they deal with it, how their body wants to deal with it, how their psychology wants to deal with it. And then the coaching element is then a question of, okay, how can we improve what you did? What was hard about that? What was easy about it? How can it be more efficient? How can it be quicker? How can it be safer for you? And then we will help them do that with all the knowledge of biomechanics and training and movement and kinetics and dynamics or whatever. But then effectively we're trying to just help them become as good as they can be at dealing with their environment. So it's not necessarily about them just learning, copying techniques. This is not a good way to learn movement. It's much better to have what's called a constraints-led approach, which is where you give them constraints and parameters, such as the task is this, the environment is this, and the limitations on it are this. Go and let them solve the problem. That is a better way to create movement. That's how human movement evolved before there was any sort of thing as training, any such thing as training in our species. And those movers were probably way better than we are now in terms of practical, capable movement. So,
you don't teach a baby to walk.
Exactly, they get it through modelling. They get it through the constraints of I want to be able to stand up and walk. Yeah,
and between here and there's nothing for me to hang on to, so I have to do it by balancing, not by holding on to things. And and gravity will tell them when they get it wrong.
Exactly. So
I used to say to when my daughters were learning to walk, I would tell them, Mr. Gravity is your best friend because he will never lie to you.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, this is that's a core thing in parkour and in combative training as well, and why sparring is so good in a way is because you want honest feedback. You want honest, accurate, immediate feedback. The best way to learn something is immediate, accurate feedback.
And that's why when somebody swings a sword at me in a drill and they're not actually aiming to hit me, that's why it pisses me off.
Yeah, it's useless.
It's not just bad training. It's offensive because they're lying to me. Because if my technique works against that, it will not necessarily work against somebody who's actually trying to hit me.
Yeah.
And so they are stealing my safety later on.
Yeah, and just stealing your time. It's just a waste of your time. And then So 100%.
I'd much rather just get punted in the face.
Yeah. And it will happen once, and then you won't have it again. So
exactly. So you figure out, oh no, I need to actually get that sword out of my way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so how did you go from like jumping off buildings and climbing trees and stuff to having an international organisation of instructors? There's quite a path from one to the other.
It's a long story, but I mean, effectively, again, I didn't plan for this to happen. So I came back from Japan, and I was, as soon as I came back from Japan, I was doing, I was working in a strategy consultancy for a bit, and editing a business magazine as well. So those things I was doing just to keep me alive in London when I came back. But I was mainly interested in training parkour, and some of the French guys moved to London at the same time, who I knew. So they moved over to train here and to sort of just bring their lives here. And we ended up training all day, every day, pretty much. So parkour just gradually, actually pretty rapidly, took over my everyday. And then we were asked to, we started teaching one class. Me and Forrest started teaching a class, and that was very popular because we kind of thought we were in the state of mind where we were like, well, if this art is going to grow and if it's going to survive, if other people are going to study it, we need to make it accessible. But other people have to learn it. Otherwise, it will survive one generation, 2 generations, and die out. So we thought, we've got to make it accessible, and we had the skills to do that. So we started teaching a class. That class was super popular, and pretty quickly, the UK governments got involved. City of Westminster got involved, and were like, "Wow, this looks awesome." And some very forward-thinking people there were sort of like, "Can you teach this to schools? Could you teach this to kids in disadvantaged areas?" And we said, yeah, probably. So we adapted the class and the teaching to that. And it kind of grew from that. At the same time, obviously that's the teaching wing. At the same time, we were also, obviously, because we were the early practitioners of parkour, the media had jumped on it. 1999, Nike did the first advert. So the media had jumped on it as this spectacle thing. So we were already doing a lot of stuff in the media. We were already doing movies and stunt work and things like that. Okay. So, and being paid for that. So that was already becoming like a profession we were sort of making. And then add that to the teaching, which was exceedingly cheap at the time to join the classes, but it was still making some money. And we suddenly realized, like one day, literally we just woke up and we're like, you know what, this is our career. This is actually what we do for a living. We do parkour, we get paid to do it, and that's it. So, so it was a case of, well, in that case, let's try and do it properly and grow it. So we created the company and to house the vehicle for teaching and create the academy, and it went from there. And it just sort of, because we were the first ones teaching, we were immediately dragged around the world to teach more people. And so we ended up spending our lives traveling and teaching, and then we created standards for coaches, so education, coach education, teacher education, so that people could learn how to teach other people if when they got experienced enough. And it kind of just expanded from there. So it was crest of a wave thing, I suppose, in that parkour was growing in popularity. Just about, the media had got hold of it. It was starting to appear in TV and in movies and stunts and stuff. And
I remember in a Bond film.
Yeah, Casino Royale, right?
Films.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
6, maybe 5, 6. So yeah, and we were just the ones who sort of were training hard when that wave crested, and because we had the skills to teach it and to explain it, I suppose, and to understand it in that way to a wider audience. A lot of the original French practitioners, they were not interested in teaching. They were not interested in spreading it to other people. A lot of them they just did it for their own training, and which is totally cool. They weren't interested in spreading it. They didn't like the media, the establishment in that way. They were quite reclusive, and it just didn't really go anywhere in France as a result. So it took off in the UK much bigger than it took off in France. Because it was just organized better here, probably, and the authorities here were more open-minded to it, which is really cool.
That is kind of cool. I'm sort of thinking of sort of parallels to historical swordsmanship. The thing is, swords have been in movies since forever, and they're always wrong.
Yeah,
I mean, not always, but almost invariably, it's just a horror show.
Yeah,
right.
It's a show.
I often shut my eyes during the sword fights because
yes.
I just can't bear to see it. But I guess because we're using weapons, like governments and whatnot are not the slightest bit interested in supporting historical martial arts in any way.
Sadly.
Whereas you have a more I guess media friendly thing where you're not hitting anybody, you're not hurting anybody except occasionally yourselves. I mean I've trained with you. I know from experience that you have a very safe, very sensible, very progressive approach to how you train. This is not a criticism of you at all. But YouTube is entirely filled. Most of YouTube is parkour epic fails where people hurt themselves in the most appalling ways doing very stupid things.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that? I mean, are they not doing real parkour, or are they just doing it badly, or does everyone have those experiences, just not everyone is dumb enough to video it and put it on YouTube? Or
no, I mean it's a combination of lots of things. Obviously, parkour spread very rapidly, and it spread very quickly because of the internet beyond its capacity to teach a community, right? So people watch on the internet and just go and copy it. And most of the original people that did that were very serious. But then as it spread and became like a spectacle thing, then you got kids just sort of, and adults just going, oh, I want to be able to do that, and just going out and immediately trying to copy it without understanding the training. So yes, most of those people, the majority of them, and those videos and things, you would look at them and say, well, they're not really training parkour. They don't really know what they're doing. They haven't approached it progressively or gradually as was done originally. They're not strong enough to do this. They're et cetera, et cetera. So that would be the same as, as blaming professional racing drivers for all car crashes. It's like, there are a lot of idiots who drive. That doesn't mean the professionals don't do what they do really well and can't teach you how to do what they do really well.
Although professional race car drivers do get killed quite often.
Although they get dangerous sport. So, but it's about progressive training and in that way. And most of those people and that, it's very accessible. You can go out and start parkour anywhere, but if you don't know what you're doing, you don't take it gradually and progressively, then you can make mistakes. So, but the same in any athletic discipline, I suppose, skiing or whatever. You can have loads of bails. You can have loads of fails, and the bails look worse in parkour because there's no snow. But a lot of those bail videos, they don't. Interestingly, there's not a lot of serious injuries that come out of them. Most of the time, you'll see the kid run around and get up, or get, most of the time there's not very serious injuries. Serious injuries in parkour are incredibly rare. And most of the time it's minor injuries, sprains and strains and bruises that you get from any athletic discipline. So it's not that much of a problem there. So no, teaching wise, we've never had an issue with that, but there was a huge education piece in that the government were supportive here, but not everyone, not the schools. And it took us many years to convince the establishment and the education authorities and the fitness authorities that this is just a movement practice. Because it's parkour's fault in a way, because they'd seen all the movie stuff and the jumps and the spectacles that the movie like. So they go, "Where's that?" You'd be like, "No, it's just movement."
Is it really a good idea to train underprivileged kids how to climb up buildings and run along cranes and there's potential for mischief here?
Yeah, those are the kind of questions we'd get. Yeah, and you kind of have to go, well, it's. That's kind of that's a strange view, and the reality is that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And the Met Police, when we ran sessions in Westminster in 2005 for disadvantaged kids, the Met Police said that crime went down in those groups by 69%. So clearly, learning a discipline and a transformative practice like parkour, which takes skill and persistence and commitment, you're not going to do that to become a thief. People don't do that. That's just not how thieves operate.
No, exactly.
People that are studying discipline are going to go down a good path.
Right, and people who practice swordsmanship are much less likely to murder somebody with a sword, I think, than people who don't practice swordsmanship.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just a perception thing. So we had to retrain people's perception around risk. We had to go through the whole risk-danger discussion with a lot of them. But the health and safety executive, the most senior professor of risk in the UK, David Ball, was a big advocate of ours early on and a really nice guy. And so all those people do support us and do engage us, and because they understand they're educated enough to understand risk and danger and all this sort of stuff, and look at the statistics and actually make rational, statistic-led decisions about these things, rather than the irrational response, which most people's fears are irrational, right? And most people's fears are incorrect. The things that most people are afraid about are incorrect. So.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, people are frightened of things that are very unlikely. People are much more frightened of home invasions than they are of car crashes.
Yes.
Or of
flying.
Flying, or they make like lifestyle decisions that lead to them getting heart disease or cancer or whatever. But they weren't frightened of heart disease or cancer. They were frightened of, I don't know, dogs.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah. And so, a lot of fear is irrational, but I don't think it's irrational to be afraid of heights, because heights can kill you. If you fall off a high building, you could die.
Falling can kill you.
Yes.
So the height can't kill you. The fear of falling is embedded in the human. So one of the only two fears that are you're born with, that are hardwired into your brain. You can't get over.
What's the other one?
Fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. So the startle reflex.
Okay.
So those are, you're born with those. You can't get rid of them. They're there for a very good reason. So they're part of the startle reflex, and the Moro reflex is the fear of falling, and that's babies are born with that. If you take a baby out of the womb and hold it up and drop it, it will immediately spread its hands and feet. It immediately knows.
Do that.
They do test things like that, but don't drop it onto the floor. They just let go of it slightly, then catch it again, and you'll see it automatically does this stuff. So it knows that falling is bad. So it's hardwired for that already. Loud noise is the same. Every other fear you learn. So the fear of heights is a learned fear. It's not something you're born with. And you can any learned fear you can unlearn, or you can overwrite, let's say.
Yeah.
So, but the fear of falling is hardwired, but the fear of falling is not the fear of heights. So, because the fear of falling is what keeps you standing up. So fear of heights is different. There's no. If you're competent with your movement and you're comfortable when you move, it's the same as moving. It's just a different environment to move through. So there are different risks at height. The risks are different from moving through a street in a city, for example. But again, like I say, height training in parkour is only a very small subset of parkour. Most parkour is not.
Yeah, and I'm not meaning to focus on height. It's just there's a sort of thought experiment I do with my students sometimes, where if you get them to like walk along a bench, and it's absolutely fine. Everyone could do it. We sometimes actually fence standing on these narrow kind of gym benches, which are about 20 centimeters wide, and you can do fencing on that, because it just changes the environment a bit, and you have to think about where you're putting your feet in, right? And then no one has any trouble with it, right? But if you were to suspend that exact same bench across a pit full of crocodiles, right? No one would do it.
Yep.
Right? Although the actual risk of coming off the bench is the same.
Yep.
Because the consequences are so different.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it's worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's known as perception action coupling in movement. In that your actions are always driven by your perception of what that action will bring about, and then the action. And once you do the action or an action, it then changes the perception further. So it's a cycle of perception and action. Yeah, that all movement is governed by that.
Yeah. Okay. So when I mentioned that I was going to be interviewing you, some of my students, and they know I'm a massive freak about joint care routines, and I do like forearm massages and knee massages and all that kind of stuff, stretching and what have you. They immediately wanted to know about your joint care routine because jumping onto concrete isn't generally recommended for keeping your knees safe and healthy. So what do you do to keep your joints working properly?
So parkour, I guess a number of things it's shown us. One thing it's shown us is that humans are incredibly good at dealing with and dispersing impact through the body if they move well. So we're much better at dealing with impact than we think, and impact is actually really healthy for the body in terms of bone density and stuff. But yeah, it's got to be relative to your strength capacity. So your strength has to be able to absorb that impact and or disperse it, allow for dispersal. So the strength of your muscles and your connective tissue has to be well trained. That takes time to condition that. So the first step is you can't rush in parkour in this sort of movement training. You must always progress within the capacity of your strength in a way, and build the strength before you build the impact. So a lot of strength work, a lot of mobility and flexibility work, as you say, and a lot of technical training in terms of how to land, how best to absorb impact, and training the nervous system to anticipate that and deal with it very well, keeps your joints safe and healthy and strong and makes them stronger. So, but it's a question of, developing this, we sometimes call it kind of bulletproofing the body and training the body to take forces in a non-linear fashion or multilinear, multi-directional fashion, which is what the body's designed to do. Whereas most fitness training over the last 20, 30 years went down a very linear pattern of training, very sagittal plane dominant. So it was very good at making you develop force in one line, mainly because fitness training was tied to sports when they were running and or maybe moving jinking left and right, and that was it. So there's not really any truly multi-directional movement going on. And that actually that makes you more likely to be injured when the stress is applied to the joint in a way that it's not ready for, hasn't trained for. So our training is about developing a multi-directional ability to deal with force, and that's through lots of non-linear mobility training drills. But the reality is the agility required to train in parkour and to move through your environment does all that for you, as long as you do it in a progressive way. It will build a multi-directional non-linear resilience within the body that can then absorb impact from lots of different angles. And that protects it's more likely to protect your joints. So it's about developing an intelligent body for movement, and all the right capacities, the right strength, the right endurance, the right mobility, the right flexibility. So it's just the same as learning to fight. There's a very complex art within that, but when you understand it, it goes back to just being. It's just training, like Bruce Lee said, a punch is the punch when you begin, and then when you get more into the art, a punch is no longer a punch, and then when you're a master, a punch is again just a punch. It's kind of the same, it's just training, it's just practice, But yeah, there's no reason your joints. It should make your joints stronger and healthier if you're training well.
So, just for the sake of people listening who may not be familiar with these things, what would be a good example of an exercise that generates non-linear strength?
So the way you've got to think of the body is first of all as a holistic system, but secondly as a system of systems, but secondly as what is known as a biotensegrity model. So the body is right. Ignore the fitness definition, the old fitness definitions of the body being a mechanical structure of joints and levers. This is true on a very simplistic level, but the reality is the body is a biotensegrity model. So which means it's architecturally speaking, it's held together by tension and compression, right? So it's held together by the compression expressed in certain ways and tension expressed in certain ways by connective tissue, and the bones, which are close to each other but don't contact each other, they're held in place by tension. So it is that is the definition of a tensegrity model. And the body is just biotensegrity in that it is, and this is all organic things are like this, right? So and a biotensegrity model responds best to pressures from all sides and different angles a lot of the time, and it will always return to its normal shape. Once you've applied pressure, it will bounce back. So once you understand the body is that, then you understand that the best way to develop strength is to apply forces in non-linear ways. So to apply forces in holistic ways. So, for example, torque and twisting motions this is the best way to generate force, which is why punching is always a twisting motion and all that. These are the best ways to generate force, and therefore are the ways you should be receiving force in order to make that chain of movement stronger. So, for example, rather than just doing basic squat pattern up and down, an all air squat, that's fine, but it's very simple for the body. Like, why not do it as a spiral? So what we call spiral squats, or non-linear squats, or irregular squats, they're sometimes called. So if you squat but spiraling at the same time and then come back to standing, you will realize that the forces going through your body and your knees and ankle and hips are very different. It's much harder, but that's more likely to happen in movement. Those are the positions your body's going to be in movement.
Yeah.
So you need to prepare the body for that. You need to strengthen it. So it's kind of that simple. Find out what stress is the body going to endure in movement, and then apply force in those ways, but in a gradual, progressive way.
Okay, so, well, for my listeners, my readers who are familiar with my material, we're talking about twisting squats.
Yeah.
Where, let me just demonstrate it for Dan so that we make sure we're talking about the same thing. A twisting squat is where you go all the way down. You can't see it my feet are sort of at right angles and then around the other way. So that sort of thing rather than simply straight up and down. Yeah, okay. So twisting squats for the win.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be an example of a non-linear motion as opposed to a regular squat, which is just straight up and down.
Yes, and there's hundreds of variations of that, and they're all really useful. Yeah. Really cool.
Okay. Excellent. And so do you have any sort of like additional practices like ice baths or massage or anything like that that keeps the joints working properly?
Not really, no. I mean, so tissue quality in terms of flexibility, some sort of myofascial release and that sort of stuff. Yes, sometimes after a really hard training session, maybe, or before a session, maybe. But and some flexibility elements. I think stretching and flexibility is really healthy. But my philosophy has always been that like animals, which don't stretch and don't have tissue sort of quality maintenance methods, and yet they're healthy their whole lives and move really well. That if your training and your lifestyle is good, you shouldn't need to have these things like regular massages and regular this and regular treatments and stuff, because the body is a self-organizing system, and if it's treated well with the right stresses and given the right food and the right sleep, etc., it shouldn't require those kind of external maintenance things, because the body is designed to do not to need that. So and it doesn't. I'm not saying that those things are bad. You might need them if you're putting the body through unnatural stresses, which a lot of humans do in the modern world, and have evolved bad habits and bad patterns and bad postures. You might need them to correct that stuff. But if you're able to not develop those bad postures and bad habits, and you keep moving all the time, and you live fairly healthily, you shouldn't require them. This is my philosophy. So I don't really require them. I don't really need massage. Doesn't really do a lot for me. I do stretch and do flexibility work, but I don't really need to do it unless I've had a really hard session and I'm trying to sort of in some way alleviate the DOMs or whatever. But we don't really know if you can do that scientifically. So some tissue work and that here and there, but I don't really need it, and I'm happy about that. So
alleviate the DOMs? What's that?
DOMs are delayed onset muscle soreness. So basically, it's the fitness term for when you do exercise and the next day you're sore. That's called DOMs. Okay. But no one really knows biologically what that is, what causes it, and no one really knows if you can mitigate it. So it's a bit weird.
I mean, I would say that if people are working 6-8 hours a day with a computer and a mouse and stuff, they absolutely do need remedial.
Yeah, and that's
training.
exactly
that. And that's basically what most of my wrist and forearm conditioning stuff is for, is so that I can write books.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's curative, as you say. That's remedial. They've got a condition that is unnatural for the human body, and they therefore must take medicine, which is joint work and all that sort of stuff.
I look at it differently. It's like I look at it more like it's an extreme sport. Right? Like running ultra marathons. You're basically getting your little forearm to run ultra marathons all day.
Yeah.
And as anyone who takes anything to an extreme does, you need remedial work to kind of recover from that extreme.
Yes.
Also, like, rapier lunges, right? They are totally natural. There's nothing unnatural about them, but it's not natural to do several hundred of them on one side a day.
Yes,
and then
that's for sure.
Right. So we're doing the same limited motion over and over. So a lot of swordsmanship doesn't have a complete range of motion because you don't want to be doing certain motions when you're fighting, and so it's a restricted range of the possible motions your body should be doing. So to my mind, because my core art has a restricted range of motion, my general training has to include all the other ranges of motion that are missing in my art, so my body gets all of these things. So, I mean, for example, that quadrupedal stuff we were doing at your seminar, I do that sort of stuff in my regular training because, that's like hands and feet on the ground, moving sideways, moving forwards, playing around with it, all that sort of stuff. Because you would absolutely never do that in a sword fight.
Yes.
Right? But your body needs to move in all these different ways.
Yeah.
So I include all of that sort of stuff specifically because it's missing from my core movement practice.
Yeah. And that's a really good way to look at it in terms of like the modern lifestyle, the modern urban lifestyle is an unusual and an unnatural stressor on the human body, and therefore you may have to provide balancing things like stretching, like et cetera, because people are having postural problems that they shouldn't have. And there is, if you go back to when we were more tribal cultures or hunter-gatherer or whatever, but pre-industrial, let's say, and the blue zones in the world are still like this. Those people don't train, they don't stretch, they don't do tissue massage, they don't go to the gym, they don't do any of that stuff, but they move well and they're fit and healthy their whole lives, and then they die and that's it. They don't get sick or whatever. So that's what a human has evolved to be. The modern industrial lifestyle that we live, the urban lifestyle that we live, is not in tune with your evolutionary way of being. So it is like not a sickness, but it is a problem. It is an extreme stress, like you say, and that extreme stress must be mitigated if you've got to that stage. So my hope is that, and what we try and do with parkour, especially with young people, is that we try and get them before they've gone down that path and say, look, if you start moving now in this very organic, very natural, very holistic way and keep moving like this your whole life, you will never need that stuff, and you will end up being fit and healthy for the whole of your life, and you will live a long, long life. That's the hope. In that some way we can sort of battle against the decay of the human form that is happening through urbanization.
I have an example for you, right? When in 2015, I lived in Italy for 3 months with my wife and two, at that time, quite young children. And I didn't do any training at all, right? Just none. I was basically on holiday for 3 months. It was awesome, right? But every day we would go on walks, and the children, when we would find playgrounds, would go and play and climb on the climbing frames and swing around. And I would join them. And this is not common practice in Italy. I think in most cases I was the only adult on the climbing frames and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just like, doing all the stuff the kids were doing, and it was absolutely exhausting.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But I did not. I think I may have done 5 push-ups the entire time I was away.
Yeah.
Right. Came back and led my first class, and I was fitter than when I left.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, if you can keep up with a 6-year-old on a climbing frame, I don't think you need to worry too much about.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And those 6-year-olds, they're doing. That's where parkour came from. They're doing the nascent version of parkour. So yeah, absolutely right. If they just keep doing that, they will stay fit and healthy and strong. But that's the problem is most people don't keep doing that, right? We stop doing that. So
because it's not cool. Like my kids are teenagers now, and they're not going to go play on a climbing frame. That's for children.
Yeah,
and their weird father, but for children.
Yes.
So how do you include play in your training?
I mean, like I say, parkour it comes from play in a way anyway. So it's built in. It's built in. I mean, parkour. The concepts of parkour are really the central concepts are exploration of your environment, discovery, and looking for challenges, and then overcoming those challenges and adapting to those challenges. That's the process really. So parkour is a very playful, explorative discipline in and of itself. And it's just it's fun for the human body to move in that way. That's why kids like doing that. That's why so much of their play is locomotor play and physical play, and because it feeds the body. So the brain and body like it, feel good. All the energy, the chemicals, the hormones, the endorphins that run through you, all that stuff feels good. So it feels fun to do it. So play is kind of built into parkour. It doesn't mean we don't also have a lot of hard work in parkour. It doesn't mean that parkour doesn't involve lots of training and in terms of the disciplined elements of skill acquisition. But the core of parkour is playfully exploring your environment and learning to create and overcome challenges. So it's very, in that way, has the creative elements as well. So it's right in there. It's tied in there. And we always encourage people to keep that, and that's why people get into parkour. That's why they like it at the start. So part of our training methodologies and our education pieces are about keeping that. Don't lose that, because if you lose that, you kind of lose the point why you got into it in the first place. So it must always be fun for you. You must always have an element of play. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the historical martial arts community, certification of instructors is this massive, just don't go there, basically, because it requires a curriculum that people agree on and a method of teaching that people agree on. Yeah. And because historical martial arts has kind of grown organically from a bunch of isolated weirdos like me who are studying specific historical texts and coming at that with various fencing or martial arts backgrounds or no background at all or whatever. And so we have lots and lots of different interpretations of the same texts, and we have lots and lots of different ways of training, and we have lots and lots of different kind of club cultures and school cultures and what have you, right? Oh. There is no sort of generally accepted, this is what historical martial arts really is, and this is how it should be done. Right? Yep. Which I think is actually a good thing. It's a strength, because we have this extreme diversity of approaches, and so we can find out what works and what doesn't. And eventually, maybe in 50 years' time, there'll be more of a consensus as to how things should be done, but there's no rush to get there. Right. But it would be super useful to be able to certify instructors for like insurance purposes and for just making sure that the students are being properly looked after by the instructor, because they know how to run a safe class and they know how to look after their students' best interests, and they've been explicitly trained to do that. That would be great. I do it in my school, and it's fine, and it works. But because we don't have a common curriculum, like internationally speaking, we don't have a common curriculum, so we don't have a way of certifying instructors. Mm. But you do.
Well, we don't have a common curriculum.
Okay. So you have instructor certification without a common curriculum. Tell me more.
Yeah, because they're completely separate things, right? So for us, the way we look at our coach education system and our global certifications, they're about coach education. So they're about taking practitioners and teaching them how to teach. So it's about learning how to become a coach, how to become a teacher, coaching science, which is a huge field of study in itself, psycholinguistics, social linguistics, all this stuff. So coaching is its own art. So what we're doing is we're taking parkour practitioners, and there is a generally, as there is in what you do and what you teach, there is a generally accepted, like, this is basically what you learn. So these are the movements roughly you're learning. Yes, there may be different ways of learning them, different emphases, different teachers, different whatever. But generally, you're learning to jump, you're learning to vault, you're learning to climb, you're learning to swing, you're learning to roll. Same as in sword fighting. Generally, you learn to cut, you learn to defend yourself, you learn to parry, you're learning to whatever. So, but they're different nuances. We're not teaching people the nuances. So when we do coach education, we're saying that's your job to learn that as a student. Your job is to go off and practice and become good at sword fighting or become good at parkour. Our job is to teach you how to teach those skills to someone else. So it's about learning the vehicle of delivering information, and that's coach education, which is very different from, like, you can have curriculums, and there's nothing wrong with having curriculums too. They can be useful, but in ADAPT, the global parkour coaching qualifications, we do not teach a curriculum at any stage in the process, at any stage of the qualifications. They are learning solely how to become an amazing coach. If elements of the course do involve biomechanics, strength training, and all this sort of stuff, because there's a lot of science around that. So we can say, look, this is how you develop strength. This is how you develop endurance. This is how you develop power. This is how you help. These are the biomechanics of this movement. We can go into the science of that, because it's hard to dispute those things. It's biomechanics and it's biology and anatomy and stuff. So you can teach that stuff, and we do. And we can teach technique in the stuff. If they want to learn technique, we will also say, there are courses where you can learn the technical stuff too. So if you want to become a teacher of parkour and you want the technical training, then come to these courses, and these will teach you some technical stuff as well. But in order to become a coach, you don't need that. If you've already got your own 10 years of parkour background and you just want to now become a teacher, all we're going to do is teach you how to teach, which is coach education, which is totally separate from technical training.
Okay, but you need for the teacher to have something to teach, they need to have they need to be teaching a thing.
Yes.
How to jump over a fence or whatever, right? And they need to have students to teach that too. And at the end of the class, the students should be better at the thing than they were at the beginning of the class.
Yep.
Right? Okay. So leaving aside the technical component of specifically how you jump over that fence, what do you do to teach the coaches how to be better at teaching the students?
That's a big question.
I ask because I am literally writing a book on how to teach right now. So I have a deep vested interest in this.
Right, that's a big question. That's a whole other podcast probably to go into coaching.
Okay, fine.
But,
we can do that.
But yeah, coaching, I mean, that's obviously what I do and what I've done for the last 20 years at great length, and creating coach education systems. So, but what are you teaching? So first thing you're doing is looking at understanding how humans learn. So firstly, we're taking people and saying, do you understand how humans learn? How do humans learn things? What's the science of learning? Because if you know the science of learning, you can then learn the science of expertise and the science. If you know the science of expertise as in how to become good at something, you can then learn the science of teaching someone to become good at something. And you can then be able to teach anyone become good at anything, even if you don't know how to do that thing.
Yes.
So
teaching is a general skill. I absolutely agree.
Yeah, that's the first thing we tell people on the level 1 course is like coaching is separate from parkour. So your parkour training is important and you must keep doing it. But coaching is a separate discipline, and we're now going to look at that discipline. So first thing you do is science of learning, science of expertise. Then you start getting into feedback loops and understanding that humans learn through feedback and teaching feedback loops. And then you go into sources of feedback. Where do they get their feedback from? And then you go into, if you're managing and implementing, if you're the one curating the feedback loops, then you have to know how to create them, and therefore you know how to deliver them through language, psycholinguistics, neurolinguistics, cueing, all this sort of stuff, modeling. Those are the hard skills, and then you go into the softer skills, or whatever that maybe is a way of saying it, which is more about sort of human relationships and emotional intelligence, and why do people listen to you, and how do you use language to make people feel comfortable and safe, so they're in a learning space rather than a fear space or an intimidation space where they're not going to learn. So all those things are. And you could learn to study that stuff for years. I mean, people do. These are massive studies of work. So it's a question of getting people to understand that. First of all, understand these are things as a coach that if you want to be a good coach, you're going to have to start learning. And then, like, how do we learn them? How do we practice them? How do we practice those things? How do you know that you're good at cueing, as you say? Because how do you know you're good at measuring someone's progress so that you know they're better at the vault than they were at the beginning? How do you know that? So it's a huge process, and that's why our education process is very rigorous and has lots of different levels of education in it.
I do. Is it actually necessary to know any parkour to do that?
No. So to become a good coach of something, you must know the thing, right?
No. What I mean is, I would be fascinated to take that process.
Oh, you would 100%.
I am not going to spend 10 years studying.
No, 100%. So the level 1 is to attend a level 1 training course, which is a 3-day coach education course. You do not have to have any parkour experience at all.
Okay. When's the next one?
In the UK, the next one in London is in March.
I will look it up.
Yeah, you'd love it, man. You don't need to have any, having some parkour experience is good, and having some sort of movement training experience is going to be good. You're going to find the course more useful because you're going to be able to input more to the other people in the course. But we get plenty of people that join the courses who have never done parkour. They're fitness trainers, they're sports people, they're athletes. They come because they want to learn about parkour a bit, but they also want to learn about coaching and education. And then it's up to them if they want to go further, to get level 2, level 3. To get the level 2, which is, I suppose, to be the equivalent of like a black belt in martial arts or whatever. We don't really see it like that. But to get the level 2 in coaching in parkour, you must be able to demonstrate that you can do these movements, because now we're expecting you to demonstrate them to other people. So you must have some parkour training to do the level 2 and to pass the level 2. But to the level 1, all you need to be able to do is move, and therefore be able to coach in a movement setting, and be able to use and demonstrate that you can understand the coaching principles and manage a session and all that sort of stuff. So you'd be perfectly fine at level 1, man.
I would be fascinated because like one of the best things I ever did for myself as a teacher was I went on a sport fencing coaches course about 12 years ago now.
Cool. Nice.
And my main takeaway from it really, and it's completely changed the way I teach everything, is that the coach's job is to be the feedback mechanism.
Yes.
Right? We're giving a fencing lesson. So if the student does the thing they're supposed to do, they hit the coach and the coach does not hit them. If they do something wrong, they fail to hit the coach and the coach hits them. Yeah. There's a bit of wiggle room there, but that's basically it. And the feedback is done almost entirely through the sword itself.
Yes.
Right? There's absolutely no need to tell a person they've just got hit.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't need to discuss why they got hit. So if you want somebody to do an action faster, right, you simply make the window of time in which they can do it smaller.
Yes.
Right, so if they've got to hit you before you parry, you make the parry smaller and faster and faster and faster, and they'll hit you faster and faster and faster because they want to beat the parry.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing in one-on-one coaching.
Yeah. So in coaching, that's known as intrinsic feedback or task intrinsic feedback, which is a very powerful source of feedback. Yeah.
Right, and then for a class, it's a bit trickier. Basically, what you have to do is get these students doing their pair drill stuff to basically set up a whole set of individual lessons. So one student is coaching the other and using these same ideas to do it. And the goal of the class is just to create an environment in which that is the natural behavior.
Yeah. What's called peer coaching in coaching science. Yeah. You as the head coach or as the coach of the class are creating an environment in which people coach each other. Yeah. So that's using peer coaching. Yeah. And it's super, super vital for human learning.
Yeah. I will see if I can make those dates in March because I think this will be fascinating.
Yeah. You just come along, man. You'll enjoy it. Let's do it. I've got about 5 minutes left, dude, and I've got to go unfortunately to another meeting. But
right. Sorry, okay. Sorry, I should have checked the time before.
It's unfortunate because we could talk for days. So
yes. And we can always do this again. Okay, so let me just skip straight to my last question, which is, what is the best idea you've never acted on?
Yeah, so the best idea I've never acted on, I think, and I still kind of regret it, is something. So when I came back from university and was I was doing parkour and stuff then, but I was back from uni and I was very I was super into sword training and swordsmanship, and I had this idea to travel the world and I wanted to go and travel the world and find all the sword schools, all the sort of traditional sword schools that still existed in every culture, and spend time with them, each one, learn from them, and then fight them. So I wanted to go and spend some time with the school, like a month with the school, train with them respectfully, and then say, can I duel in some way, in whatever way you guys do it? Right. Can I duel one of your swordsmen to see if what I do works? As a pressure test. Great idea. So that was my plan. And then a producer friend of mine was like, dude, we should make a documentary about that. And I was like, okay, cool. So we started talking to Tiger, which is a big production company at the time, about doing a documentary series called, I think we were going to call it The Edge of the World. Which was, and the idea was it would follow me doing this. Each episode would be me training with the school, learning about the culture of that sword school. I was very interested in why did swordsmanship survive in some cultures and not others. I was very interested in those kind of questions. And then at the end of the episode, there would be a fight to see if what I do works and what they do works.
I have a friend called Arman Al-Assad in Finland who did exactly that. And it was a TV series called Kill Arman. And it was a bloody good thing to do. He got the shit kicked out of him for that. And that's why they call it Kill Arman.
That's great. Yes. That's great.
So
I was planning to do that in 2000 and 2002. And And I really wanted to do it. We got quite far. I was talking to the production company. We started to map it out. We started to, go through episodic structure. But then the parkour stuff started getting kind of busier and busier. And it was just like, I can't take a year out to go and travel and do that when we're doing this. So I had to let it go and start with the parkour stuff. And I don't regret that because I love what I do. But I wish I could have done that at the same time.
Okay, that's a really good. And there's still time.
There is still time. Yes,
you could.
I've got more time now, so it is the sort of thing I could do later. Yeah.
Excellent, brilliant. Okay, so Dan shows up in your sword school, people. be nice to him for a while, and
Go
then
easy on me.
beat the ever-living shit out of him afterwards.
I'm sure that'd be okay. That's what I would want. That's what I would want, though. Yeah. So, but
Brilliant.
yeah. Maybe one day.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dan. It's been great to see you again.
No, you do, guys. You too. Yeah, and let me know if you want to come to that workshop. Then drop me a line, and I'll send you the details or whatever. We'll get you along.
Brilliant. All right. Thanks, Dan.
Awesome. Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening. You can find the episode show notes at swordschool.com/podcast, where you will find transcriptions, photos, videos, and links for this episode. You can find a direct link to the show notes for this episode in the description. Join us next week for another cracking conversation. See you then.